For the next session, we're joined by the GlobalLogic panel, led by Eloisa Tovey, Content and Marketing Manager for GlobalLogic. The panel discussion title is Controlled Innovation, an oxymoron or a must-have for responsible AI. Please welcome the panel to the stage.
That's just for the kids at home.
You got your picture done?
Tell my family what I do for a living.
Okay. Do they not believe you?
No.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Eloisa, and I'm really excited to be here today on behalf of GlobalLogic and lead this panel discussion in partnership with AWS, Snowflake, and Immuta. For those hearing the name GlobalLogic for the first time, we are a product and platform engineering organization that specializes in complex engineering and building digital experiences for the modern world. Now, before we jump into the conversation, we should probably address the big picture behind us. So is anyone feeling a little bit uneasy right now, a little bit uncomfortable with being filmed? See a show of hands at all, if anyone's feeling a little bit?
You got two.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Very happy, yes.
Okay.
They're starting to get worse.
Well, good news is these are fake cameras. So you're not being filmed. There are cameras behind you, but these ones aren't doing any damage today. That being said, if you were to come to England anytime soon, the chances are you'd be caught on CCTV cameras up to 70 times a day. In London, I think it's up to 300. And if AI was to get its way, it would hopefully start to monitor the surveillance of these cameras, using your beautiful faces to constantly train itself and get more clever as it does so. Oh, I don't have a clicker.
Is there a clicker?
Is there a clicker? Oh, we're moving. Okay. So, other ways that we can train AI models is to feed data directly into an algorithm. So I'm going to ask you to entertain me and stand up if you have a tattoo or two. Come on, don't be shy.
There we go, come on, we've got our participation. Here we go. There's quite a lot of tattoos. Good lord.
Perfect.
I'm behind
Don't
the
ask
curve on this.
where.
I'm not asking where. That's far too much information, Patrick. Well, as you know, human bias can act both for and against individual circumstances and choices. And something as simple as a tattoo can actually have an algorithm work against you if it assigns a negative bias to it because of data. Now, luckily for you, this entirely fictional algorithm of ours is very generous today, and it's basically decided that everyone who's a tattoo owner gets a free chocolate bar. Initially, I was meant to throw these out into the audience, but I did promise my team I wouldn't hospitalize anyone. So instead, what we're going to say is come find GlobalLogic after and get your reward then. When we first asked the completely fictional AI team how it came to this conclusion, we were surprised, right? And the only answer they could give us, it was something about a black box, and they couldn't give us much more. This is the team in question. And so, as you can see, negative bias can creep in when we're not paying attention. So why does this matter? Why are we here today? Why are we having this conversation? Well, AI models need data to learn from. And at the moment, we're seeing some governments advocating for the weakest possible AI regulations to make sure that they can attract and retain business and investment. On the other side, we're seeing other governments competing to develop the most comprehensive and effective regulations to make sure that AI is used for good. Whether it's a race to the top or the bottom, one thing's sure that if we don't have these legal frameworks and there's governmental compliance and guidelines, people will continue to innovate until a legal barrier tells them to stop and consider the responsibility of what it is they're building and the data that they're building it from. And whilst we can have some fun with AI, it's worth noting that AI models can also learn from fake data too. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my esteemed guests, Dr. Maria, Patrick, Farwad, and Tim, to talk about controlled innovation and whether it's an oxymoron or a must for responsible AI? Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start with a question for Patrick. In June this year, the EU introduced its first regulation on artificial intelligence, aptly named the AI Act. Does this mark the beginning of responsible AI or the stifling of innovation?
Well, thank you very much. So I think guidelines are absolutely necessary. Donald before talked around regulation and IP and all these things that we have to get to grips with generative AI in particular. And I think, as a society, we've been living with AI for a long time now. We just don't see it so much, and it's not as transparent as what we just talked about here in the example you gave. But training models is very difficult, and again, Donald touched on this. We're going to be using models that have been created by other people.
Yep.
So we're not actually sure what's gone into them models to train them. We talked about bias. There's positive bias and there's negative bias, and there's all types of cultural bias. So it is our responsibility that when we're using these models to have validation and test data sets to ensure that we understand as product and service vendors, right? We want to make sure that we understand how these results come about. And that's really important because the more we can trust, as a society, trust technology, the more we're able to adopt it for good. There's going to be so much innovation in so many different areas, medical, healthcare, aviation, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's going to be immense. On the other side, there's always that possibility of doing wrong, right? So we have to ensure that we are transparent when we're creating these models, and we have the idea of explainability. So at least at the end of using these models, we'll be able to say, well, I understand why these results came. And it may not be a chocolate bar. It may be you're in a queue for a medical procedure,
Yep.
or you may be trying to get into a college, or your son's trying to get into a college. So you will have to understand why it is you weren't chosen, because no one wants to be treated unfairly.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunity now, especially with generative AI, there is a serious opportunity to be treated unfairly by bad actors or immoral, creators of AI. The other thing about AI is really weird is that no one wants to be fooled. Like we have this idea where you feel like, well, hold on, I could have stood up and said I had a tattoo, or I could go to the GlobalLogic. Sorry, but you could go to GlobalLogic and say I have 4 tattoos, but I'm not showing you where. So. There's this idea that you want technology to work for you.
Yeah.
So it's important that you feel like it's trustworthy. There's an element of fairness. So all these things are important, but it will stifle technology, innovation a little bit. But then there's the other side of cybersecurity. How do you ensure that deep fakes don't hoodwink us into doing things and so on? So there's a lot there. I know there's other people, so I won't go on too much, but I'd love to talk to people later.
Yeah. What's interesting as well, as you mentioned, that people need to find out when it's not working for them, because we're unlikely to ask when it does, right? We'll just take the chocolate bar and move on. Tim, did you want to add anything to what Patrick was saying?
So when you talk about regulation, I think it's easy to see sort of innovation and regulation as like two ends of a spectrum that really are enemies to each other, but there's a place in the middle where really good regulation should enable innovation. Just by providing some of the sort of the guardrails, I think really that Patrick was alluding to, that make that an innovation that is for good overall, because we're all consumers as well as being members of industry. And so as the EU are looking at the AI Act at the moment and drafting that, I think it's that there is an opportunity for that to provide direction to industry on how we responsibly apply AI and provide those guardrails. And the tool chains are there to do it. So, represented on stage today are data platforms that provide the AI capabilities that industry can use. Tools like our own provide that sort of access management, data security to make sure that that is then applied responsibly. And so then on from that, there comes then the opportunity. And With the sort of guardrails in place, I think there is a balance that can be struck that will provide innovation to benefit everyone. And I think there's a template for that, legally speaking, which is GDPR. So it's not far removed from what we've been trying to achieve with the AI Act. And GDPR, when it was originally drafted, there were concerns. Will this stifle innovation? Is this going to be good for industry to have these rules controlling how we apply and use data, personal data? And I think, years down the line, we can now look back and say that was actually a relatively lightweight piece of legislation. Yes, it brought some sort of responsibilities on business in how it behaved, but it didn't really stifle innovation, and it protected everybody's interests and rights as individuals. So that balance is there, the precedent is there, and hopefully we'll see that then replicated with the AI Act.
Perfect. Farwad, you did a really interesting LinkedIn post either yesterday or this morning, I can't remember. Yeah. What would you say to people who are saying that AI regulations will stifle innovation?
I would tell them there was a guy this year who said that regulation stifles innovation. He was the CEO of OceanGate, the submersible that went to the Titanic. Yes, there are things, regulations may feel like stifling, but they protect lives. But like Tim just said, we need to think about that point in the middle. We've got certain countries in the Middle East where WhatsApp calls are blocked because of protectionism. They want to protect the legacy telecom revenues. You look at some of the Congress hearings of Mark Zuckerberg and Sundar Pichai, and the policymakers are asking questions that makes them, you don't even understand the basics, and you are the policy maker? So that's the thing. So when you don't have those qualified people in the policy making, you end up on one extreme or the other. Because I'm so scared, I know nothing about this domain, I'll block everything. Or I go the other way. I don't care. I don't even know what is meant by privacy. So that's why it's very important to have industry expertise in those policy making and then finding that right balance in the middle.
Okay, good point. Maria, Dr. Maria, this is your area of expertise. Patrick's just introduced the idea of explainable AI. Why is explainability so important for responsible and innovative artificial intelligence? And if you can start with explaining explainability first.
Explainability.
Try saying that 5 times later over again.
So explainability is all about knowing what an AI system does, in which context, and more importantly, perhaps, why. And it's important because actually, up to maybe 10, 20 years ago, AI was all about rule-based expert systems. You had experts writing the rules, so you had transparency, and therefore, by definition, explainability. Then artificial neural networks came around, and I remember writing my first one back in '93 for my PhD, and that had 2 hidden layers, and I was mind blown. So imagine now, and with deep learning, everything has become a black box. And that is not good, or you need to turn the black box into a kind of clearer box, because only with at least some degree of transparency you can have accountability. And accountability is important because imagine an AI-powered, AI-enabled, whatever, nuclear power station having a meltdown. Who takes responsibility for the dead people? Is it the engineers, the security guards, or are you going to blame it on the algorithm? You need to keep accountability with humans. And then if you say, OK, my applications have got nothing to do, are not that critical, but what about you need to have accountability for social justice and avoiding bias, because imagine there are already in the past 10 years, I think, there are AI systems used by American police stations that basically, if they see wrongly classified, dark-skinned people as potential crime suspects. And so you need to make sure that you address bias in advance. And then if you say, oh, I don't have critical systems and I don't actually care about social justice, but then you need to care about regulatory compliance and avoiding litigation, because what if your customers come and say, oh, why did you not offer me that upgrade, or why did you not offer me insurance? And then you need to prove that it wasn't bias built in your data. And how do you do explainability? We go back to design. And yes, deep learning is not going away, but you need to put some thought into some higher level decisions at least. And that you can do that by curating your training data. Where do you get them from? Are they representative? Are there any holes? How you label the data, or rather the labels that you choose for your training data. And that means automatically what you focus on, what you choose to focus on. And maybe you don't want to have a label for dark-skinned versus white skin, and that's very noble. But if you see that actually I have far too many false accepts, far too many black people are getting arrested, then maybe you should add that label. And then, so basically ontology and knowledge engineering, and then curating the output too, because especially now with generative AI and these highly sophisticated linguistic expressions, with linguistic perfection comes also it's too persuasive right now, because it's so linguistically perfect. People think that an LLM must be telling the truth because it's saying it in proper English, proper conversational English, Japanese, French, whatever. And so that's why explainability is important. To turn the black box into a more transparent box, so that humans keep accountability, if not for safety and staying alive, at least for social justice, and also for regulatory compliance and lack of litigation.
No, that's really good. There's an example like Dyson didn't do enough testing behind some of their technology, to the point that if you're a person of color, you weren't able to use their hand dryers because it wasn't able to detect the pigment of your skin. So it can be really nonsensical things such as that, but very frustrating, obviously, if you're trying to use a hand dryer. With regulations of certainty, how can organizations continue to innovate within regulatory guardrails? Farwad, would you mind sharing your thoughts on that?
So I always think about there's certainty and uncertainty. Regulations are certain. They are going to come. What is uncertain is what is going to be inside those regulations. What would be covered? What would be the guardrails? Like Dr. Maria said about explainability, I always believe in one fundamental concept, which is transparency leads to trust. I was talking to one of my customers, and I asked them, OK, how do you build an ethical AI data framework? And they said, we have a 3-bullet point framework. The first one is, whatever I'm doing with data analytics, am I OK to do it with my own kids' data? If that same algorithm runs on my kids, if I'm OK, that's fine. The second bullet point, whatever I'm doing with data analytics, am I OK to talk on stage and present about what I just did yesterday? And the third thing, am I OK, a crazy journalist writes a crazy headline tomorrow in the paper about what I'm doing with data analytics? As long as I'm open and I'm able to explain what's going on, that is going to lead to much more controlled innovation. There's a great book from an author, Cathy O'Neill, The Weapons of Math Destruction, which she talks about how our world is increasingly being controlled by algorithms. If you are on the upward mobility, everything falls in line. If you're on the downward slope, there is no exit for you. If there is a person with a bad credit score, they can't get a job because they have a bad credit score. They can't improve their credit score because they can't get a job. And this concept was demonstrated perfectly in this Netflix show, Black Mirror's episode, Nosedive, where there was this concept of a social credit score, and the lead woman was looking for a posher, nicer neighborhood. And she had some unfortunate accidents, incidents, and she was not able to get back on that social hierarchy. And she continued to plummet throughout it. So what we need to think about as organizations, as people building data and AI solutions, we need to be responsible. Whenever you write a code, remember there's a human at the end of that code that will be impacted. The code that you have just written, are you okay that your 5-year-old data manages that code? That's all.
Thank you. I also think it may be of benefit to organizations, insurance companies, but does it benefit us? How much of our lives do we actually want governed by data? How much of our lives do we want to be nosedived to work out our next houses? Before we close up, is there one thing that you would like our audience to take away from this panel discussion? And if that could be the one thing, I'm going to start with Patrick and move down the line. Say, what's the one thing you want people to take away?
Yeah, I think there's no stopping the innovation, especially with generative AI. I think it's a bit of a trend, but it is something that's we're entering into, and you can't put it back in the box. I think I think there's going to be some kind of shift, especially around social media and this metaverse idea, because I think there will come a backlash, I think. You already see it if you're talking to your friends or your partner, and next of all, you start seeing ads in your social media, and you start to say, you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I think the more generative AI gets under our skin a little bit, I don't know if, you saw the Tom Hanks dental ad, or the strikes in LA or the US around the writers. Things will become more fake, even more fake than they are on social media. And I think there will become a time where we really start to narrow down on the people we're comfortable with and we trust with our data and how they're giving it back to us. So it's going to be interesting.
Tim.
Yeah, I think this balance of innovation and regulation is going to be critical. But ahead of those regulations coming into force, I think organizations do need to be looking and being aware of how capabilities can be leveraged today in a way that reflects, I think, the responsibility that Fawad was talking about, having some human responsibility for how these models are applied. But it will be a competitive landscape, and organizations that don't move towards using something on this arena in their business will find themselves behind the rest of their industry. It's clear that it will be hugely impactful. And whilst we don't know truly what those impacts will be and how those tools really are going to sort of meld into how we do business today, you need to start thinking about it and looking at it.
Okay. Fawad?
I would say all these new technologies, Gen AI and all the modern innovation, I always think of them as co-pilots, not autopilots. Just like you will not allow an autopilot to land a plane, why do you think it's okay to run an algorithm on an autopilot in a black box mode? So if you want to remember just one thing from today's panel, transparency leads to trust.
Perfect. And Maria, we're running it over, so what's your final point for the audience?
As we've all mentioned before, you need to have the human in the loop. I mean, data science has changed everything. I'm a chatbot designer for my sins, and I used to design chatbots when we didn't have anywhere near this type of data, and you were just thinking up conversations or user journeys. And then with data, that changed because you could actually model your system on real world behavior, and that of course was also making them more accurate. But now with LLMs, everyone says, oh, design is obsolete. But actually, that's still not the case, because not only do we want all this regulatory compliance and accountability and all this, but because LLMs don't, and any AI technology actually doesn't just work out of the box. You need to customize it to your own domain, use case, users, end users. So design is still relevant hand in hand with data science and data analytics.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. We've only had about 20 minutes today. I'm actually delighted to say that most people in this panel are actually involved in a podcast series, which goes into a bit more detail about what we've been talking about here today. So be sure to come find us on stand 8. For all things chalk, socks, and responsible AI. Thank you very much.
Thank you.